Hi, my name is Natalie, and today I'm going to be talking about A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. As you'll notice, my dog Mishka is here today to help me with this video. She's going to be helping me with some explaining. Isn't that right, Mishka? So as we settle in with my new dog assistant, let's talk about what we're talking about here today. Today, as I said, I'm talking about A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's been a while since I've made a non-spoiler review, but just to remind you about what that's all about, essentially, this is a review of the book that includes no spoilers, so you're all good to go if you haven't read it. I'll be honest, I went into this book being completely skeptical. I mean, look at the front cover. It looks a little risque, and I had only read a few romance novels at this point, including The Selection and The Lunar Chronicles, so I really didn't know what I was expecting to get out of this, and I was a little afraid of what it might contain, but I was very happily surprised by what was contained in the pages. I had read other books by Sarah J. Maas, particularly her Throne of Glass series, and I read about the first 2.5 books, and I kind of got a little bit bored. Please don't hate me for that if you read that series. I promise at some point I really want to get back to it after reading these, but I was just very skeptical. I did not think I was going to like this book, but my friend told me again and again and again how amazing it was, how it was one of her favorite series of all time, if not her favorite series, and I was like, okay, I've got to read this book. I've got to read the series, I've got to keep going. And then it came to the fun point where she threatened to spoil the whole thing for me if I didn't read it. So I said, okay, I guess I'm reading it now. So yeah, that was kind of my introduction to A Court of Thorns and Roses. I was kind of scared to read it because it was risky. I thought it would be risky, and I was kind of scared to read it because I thought that maybe I wouldn't like it because I hadn't liked her other books in the past, but I was happy to find that I was very wrong, and I absolutely loved the series. Now, the first book, if you don't know, is part of a series, so it's A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I'm mostly going to be talking about this first book in this video today, but so far in this series is A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, and A Court of Wings and Ruin. Those were originally supposed to be kind of like a trilogy, but she recently wrote another one called A Court of Silver Flames, and there is also a kind of novella type of book that has a bunch of short stories in it that's called A Court of Frost and Starlight. Now, I have not read that book because I've heard that it's not as great as this original trilogy was. I personally think the original trilogy ended perfectly, and I don't know if she's supposed to be calling this still a trilogy and then she's writing new books, or if this new book that she wrote, A Court of Silver Flames, is part of this. I'm actually currently listening to A Court of Silver Flames on audiobook, and I'm very happy to say that I like it a lot, but it's just not exactly as great as I would say A Court of Mist and Fury was, and A Court of Wings and Ruin. They were kind of like my favorite ones in the series. But of course, this video isn't about those two books, it's about this one, and this is the first book in the series. So now you're probably like, okay, Natalie, stop talking about how you got introduced in the series and the series itself, and what the heck is this book actually about? Well, I am very happy to tell you that I'm going to say that right now. This book follows a young girl named Feyre. She is about 18 years old at the beginning of this series, and of course she gets older as it goes, but basically she lives with her family, her father and her 2 sisters, Nesta and Elaine, in this little cottage, and they were once a very wealthy family, had a lot of stuff going for them, they had a great life, and then all of a sudden terrible thing happened and they lost their manor and their estate, and now they have nothing, so they live in a cottage. And Feyre is the youngest of her 3 sisters, and she is tasked with doing everything. Her father cannot do anything because he has been incapacitated because one of his legs was broken, and he refuses to get help because his wife died, and now he's kind of in this state of not caring. And her two older sisters are too caught up in the life that they used to know, so they don't do anything. So Feyre does everything herself, which, by the way, is absolutely amazing. When you get these books that are YA romance novels, you look at them and you know, oh, the female protagonist is gonna be annoying. She's gonna be whiny, she's gonna say all these terrible things, and you're not gonna feel any compassion for her. Feyre is 110, maybe 120% different than any female protagonist you've ever read about, except for maybe the character that's in a court of not a court of things, but the Throne of Glass series that's also written by Sarah J. Maas. And even then, I think Feyre stands out among everyone. She is just such a different protagonist from every other protagonist that's a female that I've ever read about, and I love her as a protagonist. She's just very good at telling a story and telling you exactly how she feels. And it's all for a reason. She never is just whining about something because she's whining about it. She's literally saying things that matter, and everything that she's whining about, which is, granted, not a lot, she has a reason to do it. And she's not really whining. She's just kind of saying, this is how my life is, and it's kind of awful. So basically what Feyre does is she has to go into the forest a bunch of times and hunt for her family to get them food because they don't have money and her sisters don't do anything, and her father only sells little wood carvings that he does, and they hardly make any money. So they have like legit no money. So Feyre has to do everything. So she is working and going into the forest and risking her life every single day to make money for this family, which, you know, the youngest daughter doing all the work is just... Well, anyway, the whole story gets set into motion when Feyre is in the forest and she is trying to hunt a deer, and she sees this deer and she gets super excited because she's like, that will feed my family and will be great. Then all of a sudden, a wolf comes out of nowhere. Now, I don't know how much this audience knows about Fae and the fairy. By the way, fairy is spelled Faerie. It's a different type of fairy than, say, Tinkerbell. The Fae, as they're more commonly referred to, are a group of different kind of beings that usually have pointed ears and are known in mythology to not be able to lie, and they're also just very, very attractive beings. They have this kind of aura, and they're just very catching to the eye, and they draw attention, and they're magically able to do stuff, at least most of them are, and a lot of the things that Sarah J. Maas writes is about the Fae. There is a whole different kind of category for books that are YA that fit under this Fae category, and A Court of Thorns and Roses does fall under the category of Fae romance novels, which is a completely separate thing from regular romance novels. But I have read books with Fae, and I categorize that type of romance as dark intrigue. So if you've ever heard on the internet or on Goodreads, wherever you go to look for your books, that category, dark intrigue, it's probably talking about either some form of a magic, so dark magic, or something like the Night Circus might be under that category. That is also where Fae is. That's what that kind of category means, or at least that's what I take it to mean, that dark intrigue talks about Fae and fairy. It's very important to know this when I'm giving this non-spoiler review, because A Court of Thorns and Roses is about Fae. In fact, at the very beginning of the book, there is a map, and it actually literally says fairy realms. So it kind of, at the very beginning of this book, sets it up to be a Fae book. And as you can see, there's mortal lands underneath this line right here, and above this line is all of the Fae, or fairy realms as they're called. And this is kind of where the story takes place, in this land called Prythrian. So if you ever see dark intrigue anywhere, or see, you know, Fae, you kind of know what it's talking about now. It's this category of books, usually, that include this specific being. And it's important to know, because people go into Fae stuff and they're like, what the heck is this, if it's the first time you've read it? And it's just a very different environment than anything else that's in the book world, because, you know, there are fantasy novels that have all of these other creatures like unicorns and dragons and all this stuff, but Fae is completely different. It's not like this strict mythical creature. It's this very much established concept that is put into a lot of books, and a lot of romance writers who are YA writers write a lot of Fae romance. I have a few Fae romance on here. A Court of Thorns and Roses is one. Also the other series by her, the Throne of Glass series, is also Fae romance type. It has some adventure and action in it, and some dark stuff, as I said, dark intrigue. And also there is another series I have on here, the Cruel Prince series, that also is Fae. So before we go any further, I thought I would just explain this Fae concept, that it's not just another mythical being, that's this random mythical being that's brought into the story. No, it's extremely important to understanding what A Court of Thorns and Roses is about. So after that very long explanation on Fae, I wanted to kind of backtrack to where we left off in this story and explanation of what the story is about. We left off with that wolf, and that wolf is looking at Feyre, but Feyre notices that this wolf is extraordinarily large, and she comes to the realization, could it be a Fae? And this is what sets the story in motion, when Feyre has to make a decision of whether or not to kill the wolf and perhaps lose this deer that she wants to bring back to her family and knows it will be the only thing that will feed them, or if she's going to let the wolf take it and run for her life. Feyre ultimately decides to kill the wolf. By the way, this all happens within the first 20 pages of the book, so it's not like this huge spoiler or anything. Feyre does end up killing the wolf, and basically what the whole rest of the book is about is the repercussions for killing a wolf. So it's very much centered around this one key aspect of who Feyre is. Now, of course, there's other things. Feyre makes the journey into the Fae realms. You wouldn't have that map unless you knew that part of the story was going to take place there. Basically, the Court of Thorns and Roses is kind of loosely based on Beauty and the Beast. I say loosely, and I mean loosely. There are some very key things that are to be taken as, you know, direct representation of Beauty and the Beast, but there are also things that you're like, that is definitely not Beauty and the Beast, especially as you get to, I would say, the last third of the book. Now, this is important to know because basically what happens is Feyre is taken by this man who is a Fae and is taken to the Fae realms to live out the rest of her days. And in the Fae realms, you know, that Stockholm syndrome where you fall in love with the person who is kidnapping you or keeping you hostage. Yes, that's pretty much what this book is about. Now, if you think that's creepy and you're like, I hate Beauty and the Beast, I hate this whole Stockholm Syndrome thing, don't worry. Don't worry. Just, I'm going to tell you that right now. I can't say much more than that without spoiling, but remember when I said loosely based on Beauty and the Beast. And I'm just going to say this now. The first book is the worst of the three. I completely and wholeheartedly realized that that is unfortunate, and it was unfortunate for me reading it because when I was reading it, I liked it a lot, but it is kind of a denser text. This first book is about 400-ish pages, and that's not a lot for people who love to read and love this romance thing, but it is a lot for a first book that moves kind of slowly and isn't as good as the other two. And I know people who have DNF'd this series because of certain things that happen in it, and they don't like it, and they don't like specific characters, and they don't like how the plot is moving, and they never make it to the other books. And this is an unfortunate thing because the first book is so, and I mean so, drastically different than the other two. The other two take place in a completely different setting than the first book, and they kind of have a completely different story, I would say. It's very, very different from the classic Beauty and the Beast kind of tale. It is just amazing. I'm just gonna put it out there. The second book is probably my favorite in the whole series. And one thing I just want to say is that characters will surprise you. You will be very surprised by characters. Every character. That's not saying one specific one and spoiling it for you. Every character. This, as I said, is a denser text, which means it has a bit of bigger words in it. Not tons, don't get freaked out. It's like romance novels where they have slightly larger words. And I keep using that word romance, and all the people here who don't like romance novels have just run away. I can see it right now. They're just like out the door. Yeah, no, that's not what it's about. It's not just a romance. So there are romance novels, and then there's A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's romance told a very different way, and it's not just because it's a fae book. In fact, you kind of forget it's a fae book, because there are fae books where they make you remember every single page that it's a fae book, and it's actually kind of annoying. But this book is just very different. It holds true to a very compelling, very interesting, but slowly revealed story. And it really helps to know the world through this first book. Like, you really have to read this first book to understand some key elements that are to occur in the next few books and really see where the different characters come from. It's just very important to understand that A Court of Thorns and Roses isn't like that typical trashy romance that, you know, has these scenes in it that are just kind of flowery. It's very much a dense and filled text. When I say dense, I mean it's not just a story that falls flat. It has this true, deep meaning to it that's just very important to understand. That if you don't think you're getting into it within the first few pages, don't be discouraged, because it needs to set up the scene. Sarah J. Maas has to set up the way that she writes, because later on, that kind of writing will throw a curveball to you, and you'll read something, and then you'll have to read it again and again, because you'll be looking at it and saying, oh my goodness gracious, you know, this was in this book or in this paragraph. So I'm not saying that it's this typical trashy romance that's just long and pages and everything like that. I'm saying that it is a well thought out story and a great text. So that is basically the main concept of the story. Feyre killing this wolf and being taken to the mysterious Fae realms to then develop Stockholm Syndrome and figure out her life with the Fae. And that's kind of the main plot. Now, of course, I have my dog Mishka here as my own little wolf to ask if you have any other questions, to please leave a comment below and ask me if there's any other video that you want me to make, and also if there's anything interesting you'd like me to talk about. I have already made an entire video about a certain character in this book, and I hope it wasn't a spoiler to anybody, but I made a certain video about that and about a certain court as well. And I just want you guys to check that out if you've already read the series and you want to learn more about certain characters. I know that A Court of Thorns and Roses is also something that I really keep up on Pinterest. I love to make comments, and I've made a lot of Court of Thorns and Roses comments, one of which has been seen by at least 500 people. So if you're like super into this Court of Thorns and Roses thing, Or if you have Pinterest and you'd like to check out some amazing artwork, I suggest that you go check it out because there are some great things out there. Just be careful if you haven't read the book yet that you will be spoiled pretty quickly on if you research anything in that series. So beware. Another thing that I'd like to say along with that is please follow me on Pinterest if you'd like. My username is Mindlander4, and I am on Pinterest pretty regularly, so I'll probably be leaving a lot of comments, and then you'll be able to get notifications if I leave a comment. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, that's about the only thing I have that I can offer as a kind of social media aspect. But yes, if you're interested in that sort of thing and you love seeing artwork of books, and really especially this series, please go on Pinterest and go check it out. I love Pinterest, and I want to just put this little plug. Not sponsored by them or anything. I just really want people to fully grasp the community that can be given to you through a book. You know, when you read a book, you're not just entering that world, you're not just with them, you're meeting a whole bunch of people who have read the same book and who also share your loves and your common interests and who want to share their gifts and talents with the world in creating artwork or memes or jokes that they'd like to, you know, give to the community and give to you. And you can meet a lot of people online who, you know, share these common things. So Pinterest is a great place to find artwork that people have done and memes. We love the book memes that people have done. So that's my quick plug. And again, if you want to follow me, you can follow me at Mindlander4. I will be there. That's why whenever you see these videos and you see at Mindlander4, that's my Pinterest. I don't have Instagram or anything, so that's what that is. Anyway, you know, there's, again, any other videos that you want me to make, any other topics you'd like me to talk about, I will happily do so. I hope you all have a great day, and remember, to the stars that listen, and the dreams that are answered.